All right, the places that scare you. A guide to fearlessness in difficult times.
The dentist.
Yes.
Oh, this you're not asking a question. I see.
Yeah. Um. So, anybody get to read the chapter?
I
No,
did not.
sadly.
Yeah,
No.
I actually did just a couple hours ago. Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Oh, nice.
Good enough. All right. I'm gonna scroll through the acknowledgments. We're gonna skip the prologue. This prologue is not bad, but also not, in my mind, incredibly
Not important.
important.
Not just
Um,
asking, not important.
our chapter opens up with this nice little quote of "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye," which is a nice little quote, in my opinion. I thought that is a nice little way to start out this chapter that ends up, I would say, being an explanation of bodhichitta, a nice little introductory to the concept.
Yeah, basically, what bodhichitta is, what
Mm-hmm.
the advantages can be if you practice that.
Yeah. Sorry. Like I said, I was telling them earlier, I'm actually looking at a physical copy with my notes in it. The PDF was not what I had read originally, so I don't have any highlights or notes in it. But I believe here in the second page, what I have highlighted, I'm trying to figure out, comparing, it's in that second paragraph. What I really liked was this sentence of sometimes the completely open heart and mind of bodhicitta is called the soft spot. And the explanation that follows I thought was really sweet way of starting to understand the concept of bodhicitta. I mean, obviously before that we get the literal translation, right? Chitta means mind, bodhi means awake, so this awakened mind. But then this paragraph ends in the best quote I've ever heard. As Trungpa Rinpoche put it, everybody loves something, even if it's only tortillas.
I'm actually not sure I understand that because I mean, I feel like loving tortillas. I don't see how really that is equated to being um, open and vulnerable. Because I mean, sure, I can say I really like to eat tortillas, but that's really
Right. I see what you're saying. I think Pima is not really trying to say this is the same kind of love, but that even people who seem incapable of love are have it somewhere inside them usually.
oh,
Um, as it says, even the cruelest people have a soft spot. It says this soft spot, but a soft spot, right? And so I think it's just a silly kind of fun way of just putting it that there's something, even if I, what comes to my mind immediately is when I've talked to people who are just in a really dark spot, right? Like they don't see anything good in the world. They just say, no, I hate everything. You know, you mean you just get into those people who are just so attached to their depression or like are so buried in it, not even attached, but just like really consumed by it. And that may not be their fault because brains are dumb and chemicals do things. But this idea that even if you can just point out like, well, do you love I know you love tortillas. That may be an opening perhaps
Right.
to a
It's
conversation.
it's like a it's like a stepping stone. Because I mean, yeah, obviously the love for tortillas is not going to lead you to spontaneous enlightenment, although
Right.
maybe it could, but that's not really the point.
Yeah.
It's just that there is that softness inside, that there is something that you can point to and be like, this makes me happy, or this brings me joy, or whatever, as opposed to like Des was saying, everything is shit. you know,
Mm-hmm.
because if you say everything is shit, then nothing can hurt you because you don't care about anything. But we all care about something. And that's not necessarily even in that attached way. It's just learning to recognize that and then expand that. But
Mhm.
you can't do that if you're too afraid to even admit it.
Fair.
Yeah. Um to get into more of the definition of bodhicitta, I really liked later on a couple of paragraphs. I'm going to see where it is in the book. There it is. It's right here for those who are looking at the screen. An analogy of bodhicitta is the rawness of a broken heart. Um, so I had a lot of thoughts going through this chapter. I'm going to try not to jump ahead of myself. Of this, the rawness of a broken heart. This broken heart gives birth to sometimes gives birth to anxiety and panic. And I really reflected on how sometimes when you start a process like this, where you're trying to open up to the world in a lot of ways, right? Instead of hiding inside yourself, of how painful that can be at the beginning. Um,
Oh yeah.
and also, if you just stop the process, you can put yourself in a dangerous place. Um, as I consider like cognitive behavioral therapy, which I bring up every so often. Um, Sometimes you can't just open a wound. You've also got to keep going until you've learned how to like close it again, but in a better way.
Heal it.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
Like when you get stabbed, you're not supposed to actually take out the knife, kind of thing.
sort of.
Or
But you don't want to just leave the knife standing in your wound, and that
Right.
you get a professional to take it out, but you don't want the professional to just stop there. They've got to seal the wound again, but the correct way instead of the sealed with a sword way. So that comes down to you don't want to remove it because you can cause more damage. You allow bleeding, and if you're just unstoppering it, then the blood flows freely, right? And that's kind
It
of what
is.
it feels like.
It's not. It's more. Yeah. To go along with your analogy, it's like sure you can try and tend it to yourself, but if you don't have the skills to treat it correctly, you could make it worse.
Yeah,
it also helps professionals know how deep your wound was, because like a knife could be 6 inches, but only went 4 inches into your wound. You know.
Right. That's the skillfulness part. The expert would know how to deal with it, whereas a novice would be like, well, that's blood.
that's a lot of blood.
It
Right.
did.
That's a lot of
And I
blood
guess in
there.
this way, cultivating bodhicitta is becoming your own expert in a sense.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, my brain went somewhere else. Yeah. So you want? I think this is why often. So sorry, my brain is trying to form words and not go too fast. When I think about things, I remember myself as when I was a little younger being very skeptical of like why do I need a teacher? This all feels like something I can pursue on my own. Why would I need help? Why would I need the support um, of any kind, whether it be a teacher or a group who um, who
Join.
I reflect with, and I look at stuff like this and I realize like that's because I need people to help me skillfully close these things again after I've opened them up so rawly. Um, if that makes sense.
It do.
Yes. Okay. So, any thoughts from you all so far? Or
Digging it.
digging it?
Digging
Sweet.
it.
Um, My next thought I personally had was just in this next paragraph. I shared an image where I took a picture of the quote, but I have it underlined in my book. The openness and warmth of bodhicitta is in fact our true nature and condition, even when our neurosis feels far more basic than our wisdom, even when we're feeling most confused, hopeless. Bodhicitta, like the open sky, is always here, undiminished by the clouds that temporarily cover it. And this is a meaningful quote for me because I am personally bogged down by my anxieties. I borrow worry constantly from the future. I um, struggle to just embrace the true hope rather than and just instead clinging to constantly this like uneasiness, this worry, this struggle. And so I really dug this quote of even when our neurosis feels far more basic than our wisdom. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. That's exactly what happens is I get tricked into thinking that this is the reality. But it's not. It's a temporarily chaotic mess for my brain to exist in. but
Yay.
but it's not the real thing, it's not what's true. And so I just think about that. I really dug that thought process there in the in the paragraph.
Quotes like that, and with any of these books, you dive into it, you find dozens of them. They're they're so powerful because it explains something so obvious and simple that we just can't remember.
Mhm.
And it's like you could go into a whole treatise on the depths of uh, I don't know, enlightened awareness, etc., whatever. But it's not going to have nearly the same gravity as its short, simple, understandable statement like that.
Mhm.
Because I mean, we are our own best guides, and if you can relate to something and recognize the truth in it in yourself, that's worth far more than 1,000 pages of the most lucid teachings possible. I love finding quotes like this.
Mhm. Absolutely.
It's it's easy to like give to someone else and be like, here's a little nugget for you.
Here's a
Maybe this will help.
nugget. Now you can get use some Szechuan sauce. Um,
Wow,
I'm hilarious.
dude, that's true.
All right. And obviously we're like really skimming the surface of this chapter. I hope everyone gets a chance to read it. It's pretty sweet little chapter. Pimma's writing is pretty straightforward. I feel like she it's got a little bit of floweriness to it, but not in a overdone way. I find so.
I love that. I love it when you can just read it and you get it versus like sometimes text can get a bit pretentious, I feel. When it gets all like metaphorical.
Mhm.
It's hard to avoid metaphor with
Yes.
this kind of a thing, but there's absolutely something to be said for, you know, getting to the point, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And like,
Exactly.
sometimes the flowery language helps sort of set a tone, but that's usually in a more religious context than, you know, this kind of a book. But it's also hard to get away from that kind of a language because, Pema is an ordained monk. Like there's you sort of grow up into that, and it's hard to remove all of it from what you're doing when that's what you were taught.
Mhm.
That being said, I agree. This is rather straightforward, and while I haven't actually read the whole thing, everything I've seen of it is great.
Yeah, it's a book worth a read for sure. I
Hmm.
as as
Yeah,
Max
I've
knows,
also
we I've
yet
actually.
to
I'm sorry, Ben. What?
was also yet to finish it because I feel at some point she just keeps heaping exercise objects.
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm having a
I
very hard time understanding you.
Yeah, your mic's cutting in and out.
um, I don't know. Um, I don't know. Maybe I need to switch the mic again. Um,
Dogs. Hush. Yes, I know. Hush. Stop it.
Hush,
You're too loud.
sad puppies. Um,
so can you understand me? I mean, I may be far away again, but maybe.
a
You
little bit.
sound closer, but still breaking up a bit.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Um,
There we go. That works.
okay. So yeah, what I wanted to say was, yeah, I mean, I've yet to finish the book because I feel at some point she just keeps stacking exercise on top of exercise, and that I don't
Yeah.
know that was too much. It has been too much so far for me.
Mm.
But yeah, it is absolutely a good book.
I can respect that. If you're not in a good place to do a lot of stuff, I find in that case, books like this with those sorts of exercises and thought experiments and everything that you're supposed to theoretically do is better. Has always interestingly worked best for me at the same time I'm in therapy. um, because I'm coming at my brain from a couple different angles of help. Um, and for what, and maybe it's just that when I've accepted therapy, I'm also in a mindset to accept a book telling me things. I don't know if these are causal or, coincidence, you know, but just happening at the same time. Yeah.
When you're done, are you gonna have a break anytime? Just a second.
I heard noises.
Yes. Carry on. I'll be right back.
Carry on my wayward son. This is a bit of a chunky paragraph. I am trying to. Here we go. So this paragraph, and then where it ends in this highlighted area, this idea of coming into understanding based on a so a deeper understanding made massive by having that openness, so that you develop this sense of deep connection and belonging to the same family as anyone, as if any other human being on the planet, even the ones who may be causing you pain. Um, was very interesting, and I think a good thing to think about with bodhicitta, because it can be very difficult, I think, to be, I'll say, forgiving or to be open to seeing the perspective of those we are actively opposing or disagreeing with, or who are actively opposing us. So then she goes on to explain the two different levels of the bodhicitta, of this one where it's unconditional, everyone falls into it. Um, it's a all caught up in this. It's huge. It's good. It's knowing at a level that there's nothing to lose. And I think that that's a cool, not cool, a good explanation. And then the second being this more relative and your ability to suffer without shutting down. Open your minds to suffering without shutting down. So this is connected to something I was going to mention earlier, and I didn't want to jump too far ahead of where we were talking about the open wounds and having somebody who knows what they're doing seal them appropriately. I think this is very important because I've absolutely experienced this, right? You become too sensitive. You get, I think we call it compassion fatigue.
Ah, yes.
Um, so the sentence is specifically, Max, there is relative bodhicitta, our ability to keep our hearts and minds open to suffering without shutting down. So the, which is can be very difficult, at least for me. Um, it's one of the reasons I don't look at the news very often.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that I can't reflect too long on certain things because I become very overwhelmed with how much suffering there is. And not and this is where I need to train, right? This is a place I need to work on so that I
Yeah.
can be that have that bodhicitta where I can open my heart and mind to this suffering and be aware without going into that like I'm just gonna curl in a ball and never leave my bed mentality.
Like a good like a good thing that I'm not necessarily sure if it's good, but it helps me from keeping burnout and what you're describing, passion fatigue, is just kind of disassociating my emotions from my logic, so that I can focus more on helping somebody versus having this whole moment to myself.
Right, which is almost what I think one should do. It's because there's this sense that you should be fully aware and embracing of like the emotions that come through. We just have to work on not clinging to them as they come through, you know? So disassociating too far, even if you are functionally doing good, I think can be just as dangerous, at least in the long term. Because if we step too far away from our emotions, it can be really hard to step back up to them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I I say only because and part of the this discussion we're having could be that we're defining these words differently as well. So notably, I'm always willing to discuss how we might be defining things a little differently to achieve some more clarity. But in my experience when I was younger, in my teens, and I would distance myself from my emotions so I wouldn't become overwhelmed, it just meant I wasn't dealing with them. They weren't on the surface. And I had some longer term problems that arose from kind of sitting them somewhere else while I handled whatever was going on in my day to day. And so for even for years, I feel like you can move this way and you even doing volunteer work and you're being kind to people if you push things that are part of the suffering of your mind and not deal with them, or if you've chosen to disassociate from them rather than to unravel them, I just get concerned for people because I know what it did to me.
Hmm.
Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Hello. Hello.
I'm picking out some of the things I highlighted in my paper copy of my book and where I have some little notes written in the margins. Uh, and trying to pick them out from this PDF so I can discuss that with y'all. And if you have anything you've highlighted or want to talk about, please feel free to bring it up. We just talked about the ability to keep our hearts and minds open to suffering without shutting down, which I think is a very hard skill to achieve, or at least it has been for me in my life. And then in this next paragraph, let's find it. Oh, I thought this was an interesting thing to discuss. Um, so Pema goes on to call bodhisattvas warriors, not ones who kill and harm, but warriors of non-aggression who hear the cries of the world. I thought warrior was an interesting word choice, and had some potential interesting implications of what it means to, I guess, let's see, how do I say this? Because obviously it's not meant to be encouraging of violence or anything, right? It's meant to challenge situations in order to alleviate suffering, she says.
Maybe she's just using that word because it can imply a great effort.
Hmm.
I mean, perhaps a more neutral term would be to call them just workers or something. But yeah, I mean that's warrior has a bit more oomph to it.
Right, it's
Hmm.
emboldening. I mean, it's I think she's trying to provide counterweight to the probably rather easily assumed idea that opening your heart in this way is what a weak person would do. And she's saying, no, no, these are the true warriors. This
Hmm.
this takes a lot of strength and courage to do that. So I think this is in that way trying to give you perspective on the kind of effort and uh, experiences you will be going through, because doing this is not easy in any way. It's I can see why she'd say that, because it's in some ways similar to like going into a battle or whatever, but you're going into a battle with your own unconsciousness, your own
Hmm.
attachments rather than another person.
Yes. She also says some master warriors, for examples, are Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King, apparently. Um, the greatest harm comes from our own aggressive minds, to connect to what Max was saying. Pema goes on to say that we could train these things, train these acts of love and practices of meditation and loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity as our tools, um, as we work through becoming a, I'll say, master of bodhicitta. Another, let's see, down here, quote that I highlighted, and I'm going to try to figure out why I did that here in a second. But the truth is that we can never avoid uncertainty. This not knowing is part of the adventure, and it's also what makes us afraid. I think that applies in a lot of situations. So, but obviously in this context of being a sort of warrior, that there's a lot of uncertainty of, am I doing this right? Am I focusing on the right aspects? And also being afraid of losing the things that make us comfortable and safe. Going back to that, opening ourselves to suffering in a way that we don't kind of shut down. I think that can also cause a lot of uncertainty, and I have certainly felt it quite often. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, she's going into the finer details of just like, this is not a practice for someone who wants to take the easy way out.
Right.
Although at the same time, it is, because this is the most direct path.
Mhm.
So in that way, it is the easiest, because it's it gets it over with quickly. Whereas the
Mhm.
other ones might not even do it ever, but you're still suffering,
Mhm.
just trying to hide yourself from it.
I find it interesting she chose to then use an analogy comparing us to baby birds waiting for mother bird to return, even though it, let's see. Here we sit in the nest that's getting pretty smelly. Ah, timid birds. It's long been time to leave the nest, pretty much. And we continue to wait for mother bird even though she's not coming back. It's kind of an interesting, it reminds me of the pretty old quote, I think, of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over, hoping for a different result.
Mm-hmm.
And so then she leads into the question that I think is very important to ask ourselves is how do we practice with difficulty, with our emotions, with the unpredictable encounters of an ordinary day? For some reason, this really struck me because I think, because I'm a teacher, I work at a high school. I think about this sort of thing of how I want the day to go a certain way. I want to interact in with my students in a certain way, but every day is unpredictable. They're bringing something different to the table. And how do I prepare myself for that difficulty with my own emotions and not just their own? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that can carry over into any interaction of that fear. I know for me, this is a place of fear, right? This is a place that scares me, to go back to the title of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the place that scares me is not necessarily even always the longer term complications, but just what am I going to face tomorrow? And then we get this nice little tidbit of a quote down here. Hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is an ancient and eternal law. Um, it sure is. I've seen it in probably every major religion who I've read about. Like on some level, you see this exact sentiment being shared. Am I moving too fast or too sporadically? I'm trying
Oh
to
no,
follow a train of thought as
Oh,
much
you're
as
good.
possible.
it's all good.
I like how she ends this chapter quite a bit. And I think the whole little that little last paragraph is worth a read. Bodhichitta has this kind of power. It will inspire and support us in good times and bad. It is like discovering a wisdom and courage we do not even know we have. Just as alchemy changes any metal into gold, bodhicitta can, if we let it, transform any activity, word, or thought into a vehicle for awakening our compassion. And I think that that's a great mentality to let sink into your narrative on how you approach your life and your day. Because if we can see each moment as this opportunity to, not just awaken our compassion, but just to awaken others as well, I think that can be a very powerful motivator.
This reminds me of a few years ago. I wasn't doing any like reading with books like this or whatever. It was just basic mindfulness breathing practice.
Mhm.
And I was driving and doing my breathing, and then something just clicked, as happens with these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And the thing that clicked into place was the fact that all of suffering is just misunderstood wisdom.
Ooh.
And so bodhicitta, as Pema is saying here, can give you that same sort of insight. It's just that you're not integrating with your experience in a way that is fully honest and open. You're holding back somewhere. or
Mhm.
trying to protect something, and that is obscuring the actual experience. So, I mean, it's probably the most useful thing I've learned in my years of practice with this kind of thing is that no matter what happens, if you feel bad or are angry or whatever, it doesn't have to be that way.
Mhm.
You just have to know to take a step back, breathe a few times and come at it again from a, well, what am I missing?
Mhm.
What's really going on here rather than, all of my fears or anger or whatever. But it's so hard to remember to go to that mentality without the practice. So
Right.
like anyone could do it, but few will choose to do it until they get used to it, you know?
Mhm.
So we should
Yes.
all practice is what I'm saying.
Practice. What?
I know.
Outrageous.
Outrageous. I have to practice this. I'm not just gonna automatically be good at it. Dang it.
This terrifying difficult thing, I can't just do it immediately.
Yeah, I think diving into thoughts like this, though, also just as a small tangent, I think help understand what it means to be in a practice and not just receiving a lecture, I guess.
Right, you're not just accumulating knowledge, you're actually trying to start a new pattern of behavior and
Yes.
perhaps seeing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, because I recall many times when I was in a Christian setting, I felt like many times my job was to memorize as many things as possible rather than to actually learn to transform myself or allow
A lot
myself to
more
be
word, a lot
transformed.
less spirit.
Yeah. They use a
Hmm.
lot of the same verbiage though of be transformed by the Holy Spirit, right? Like this idea of being changed from within. Um but on a personal little just side note, I suppose, it never, I don't know, it's just very different than these sorts of exercises and approaches.
I think a lot of that's got to do with the culture of it.
Mhm.
I mean, because most of it's just happening by rote now. It's
Mhm.
just, yes, we'll go through the motions, but where's the exuberance? Where's
Mhm.
the actual joy in, worshiping God or whatever? It's not there. You're just going to pay lip service and eat your cracker and then go home.
Yes. But that's a
But that
that's a
doesn't
different discussion a little bit. I just
a little bit, but I feel like you're absolutely onto something. Whereas they do have the same kind of uh, paths available in terms of contemplation or whatever.
Mhm.
It's just not encouraged in the same way that it would be like with this book
Mhm.
or things like that because it's recognized. I mean, we all here recognize that just knowing something doesn't change anything,
Mhm.
but actually using that knowledge, well, now you're developing wisdom,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's the useful stuff.
Yeah. Anyone else have some thoughts they want to share?
No,
We did
For the
great. Good job, team.
we did it.
I'm sorry, what was
That was
that?
the whole chapter.
Yep, that was the whole chapter. It's a pretty this book has really short chapters for the most part. It's not a very chunky book. It's chapter 2. Yep, nope, each chapter is pretty short, honestly.
Huh.
But I think it's a lot of good stuff to think about, so it's worth kind of breaking them up and going ahead and talking about them separately. I could probably combine a couple chapters into discussions, and I think I did that the last time we went through this book, but I didn't feel like it allowed for a lot of time to really dig apart some stuff.
Right.
So this time I'm opting for one chapter at a time.
We've been talking for almost an hour now, so I think there's plenty of meat here to go.
Yes.
Sorry I wasn't able to make it last time.